Hello and welcome to ShakeTube 2017 video number 1. For those of you that don't know, this is a read-along that has been organized by Lukash over at Lukash's Books and Curtis over at Curtis Books and Films, and they have scheduled 15 Shakespeare plays to be read over 15 weeks. And I think it's a great idea. If you want to check out the introductory video, I will leave that down below. But I recommend any of you out there watching this, if you're interested, to definitely jump on now. The way this is going to work for me is I'm essentially going to make it its own mini-series in playing along with that episode trope that I've had thus far on Brian's Book Bastion. But it'll have its own playlist and everything like that. But the reason I want to separate it out is because these videos aren't necessarily going to be as detailed as my other reviews, like the over 17-minute long Watchmen review, which you still should watch, but it's not going to be as detailed. It'll be more reactionary, so there's less pressure, there'll be less editing, and I just think that it'll be more fun for me. I'm not a Shakespeare expert, and so I think doing it in this way, I'll just be able to really get my thoughts out there and then get a lot more out of the discussion. When I was looking back at my schooling, I realized that whenever we looked at Shakespeare, we never really looked at the comedies. It was more about the tragedies, really, and I think maybe we looked at a few sonnets, but that was pretty much the breadth of my Shakespeare experience, and so I'm pretty excited to go along this journey. I don't know. I'm hoping I'll be able to do all 15. I'm planning on it, but either way, just being able to read some of those plays that I hadn't read before, it's just a great opportunity. So all that being said, here for week 1, we are looking at The Taming of the Shrew, and this actually was my first Shakespearean comedy. I got my copy of The Complete Works of Shakespeare earlier on Wednesday. Oh, wow, it's floating in the screen. It's a monster. So I started reading it in that, and it really wasn't all that bad. I was understanding what was going on. I thought the introduction was pretty funny, in all honesty. It starts out with this drunk guy who a lord comes in and wants to play a prank on, so he brings in some actors that start to act out this story. And so it begins with this frame, which, by the way, I love framed stories. I think the possibilities of those are endless. It really allows you to be more creative with the story you're telling, because it doesn't have to be that accurate. If you're telling a story, any inconsistencies can really be chalked up to, well, it's not the true story, it was somebody telling the story. And so I thought that that was a great way to start, and I'll get a little bit more into that later. But as I was getting along, Jamie informed me that she had a copy of The Taming of the Shrew that was the Barnes & Noble Shakespeare edition, and it actually made reading it quite a bit easier. Even though I was understanding a lot of it, there were still parts that were a little foreign to me, which I always think is so sad to say because it is English, but there are certain parts of Old English that don't really register to me. And so in this edition, on the left side, there are annotations for any references that are to other stories or to history or any sentences that don't really make sense. It clears that up, and then also on the right side where the play is going down, they'll have little annotations right to the left of the text, and it'll define any of those Old English words that maybe aren't as prevalent in our vocabulary today.
Did you want them to see that book?
Did I not show it? Boom. And from there, I continued into the story, and if I'm being honest here, it was kind of hard to get into because of some very outdated views on gender roles in society. Of course, this was written in the early 1590s, and so it was one of Shakespeare's earliest pieces, and you know, the view on the gender roles at that time was very different, but still, just reading it now, it just made it more difficult because I didn't necessarily agree with everything that was going on. So woke. But I will reiterate that this was one of Shakespeare's earliest pieces, and so maybe he wasn't the master that we all remember him as, and maybe that's controversial, but I think it's also something to consider here. He wasn't getting into his groove with some of his more well-known plays. And on the other side of it, maybe this was a little too trendy. I don't really know if this was the case for all of his comedies because this was the first one that I had read, but even those outdated ideas and practices really had their place in the tragedies because sometimes you could get revenge on some of those characters with whatever happens to them later on. And really with the tragedies, they're just more universal overall. Again, I don't know if that's going to be the case for comedies later, but it just seems that not everybody thinks that the same things are funny. But oftentimes we find certain things like death very sad. Except, are you laughing right now? You sick In any case, Katharina the Shrew, who all of the male characters needed to tame so they could marry her hot sister Bianca, she actually wins some pun-offs with her suitor Petruchio, and in a different world, that really wouldn't be a bad thing because she was pretty clever and she was really throwing punch for punch, and I thought she was a great character as she was, but obviously as the story goes along, she goes through a very big transformation. Regardless, there really were funny moments. It was made funnier because of the edition that I had. I don't think I would have caught a lot of the jokes had I not had that Barnes & Noble edition, and I'm a little worried about reading more of the plays in the complete edition because it doesn't come with any of those annotations. I'm hoping there are any guides online that I can find. Maybe you guys have one that you could recommend, but I caught a lot of the sexual puns. There were quite a few of them, and I know that that's been a thing in Shakespeare's work, even in the dramas. One of our English teachers made sure to point all of those out at the time, but there were quite a few more when I was reading this one. And because of the framing of the story and some of the small things in Katharina's last speech, you could interpret that Shakespeare was kind of thumbing his nose at a lot of those ideas on the gender roles, but you know, it's kind of hard to justify it. You could say, you know, early work, he was throwing these hints in, but all the same, it really just felt like it was something that was pleasing to the crowds at the time, and we can't just excuse everything that Shakespeare did just because he has written so many classics. So I think that that's a big thing to consider. You will laugh, but just be prepared for some of those other themes.
Oh, women are crazy.
I hope that those thoughts were at least somewhat... what am I going to say here? I don't need to say any of that.
But I don't fucking know.
but I don't fucking know. My hashtag for ShakeTube. So that is it for video number 1 of ShakeTube 2017. I hope any of you that are watching this get interested and at least follow along with the videos and maybe read along at home and contribute to the discussions. I will again link the introductory video down below, and I will see you all on September 1st for Richard III. ShakeTube out! That should be it. You think that's good?
Yeah. Look at this sticker that they sent me with those.
Real women nap!